Namaste everybody. Welcome to the Nirvega Vidya channel. And in this video, we shall be looking at the Yoga-Tattva Upanishad. Now, what are the different topics? The first one is Mantra Yoga. See, basically the Yoga-Tattva Upanishad starts by saying that there are four kinds of yoga. And what are they? Mantra Yoga, Laya Yoga, Hatha Yoga, and Raja Yoga. So first we look at Mantra Yoga. Mantra Yoga is the chanting of the mantras composed of the Sanskrit alphabet, aksharas, in a prescribed manner. So usually the mantra is given by a guru to a sadhaka, and then he chants it in the prescribed manner. So that is Mantra Yoga. He who does this for 12 years will gradually attain knowledge and other powers as well. So this is what the Upanishad says. This 12-year time period is again something which you'll be finding repeated in the context of spirituality. I think even recently, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa also mentions about the importance of practicing, if I'm not wrong, Satya or something like that for 12 years. So we find that this 12-year time period is something which is repeated. Mantra Yoga is to be resorted to by practitioners who have a dull wit according to this Upanishad. Now, this is what it says. It says that those people who do not have great intelligence for them to be in a position to understand what the other yogas teach and to practice what the other yogas say, they can practice Mantra Yoga. It is practically for those who can't do the other yogas. That is what this Upanishad says. So this is about Mantra Yoga. Laya Yoga. Now we come to the second one. Laya means dissolution, and Laya Yoga is the means to achieve dissolution of the mind. Dissolution means to, in one sense, to merge one thing into another entity. When we say Laya is dissolution, so Pralaya refers to the end of everything, the destruction of the universe, right? It's the dissolution of the universe. So Laya means to dissolve the mind into something. The Upanishad says that this can be attained in various ways. It does not mention the different ways. It says it can be attained in various ways. One of the ways is Nadanusandhana, which is considered to be the best of all the means to attain Laya. Nadanusandhana is considered to be the best. We find that in the Hatha Pradipika. Laya can be attained by thinking of the indivisible Ishvara even while being engaged in activities such as walking, standing, eating, etc. This is what the Upanishad says. This is how Laya Yoga is to be practiced. So, I think what the Upanishad tries to mean here is that one has to dissolve the mind into the Ishvara consciousness by constantly thinking of the Lord Himself while doing all activities. The mind gets the small ego that we have, the tiny ego, gets dissolved into the Ishvara consciousness. So that is what I think the Upanishad means here. So this is about Laya Yoga. Now we come to the two important yogas that the Upanishad deals with in detail: Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga. Now, to begin with, the Upanishad does not clearly differentiate between Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga as such. It does not say this is Hatha Yoga and this is Raja Yoga. From what the Upanishad says, we can infer that Raja Yoga is considered to be the goal, which is to be attained by Hatha Yoga sadhana. So Hatha Yoga is considered to be the means to attain Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga perhaps here meaning Samadhi itself. So that is one way in which we can understand what it means. The Upanishad says that there are 8 stages of yoga. It does not specifically say these are the 8 stages of Raja Yoga or Hatha Yoga for that matter. It says 8 stages of yoga. And what are they? The same as the Ashtanga Yoga we find in the Patanjali Yoga-Sutras. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi. Now, the Upanishad also mentions 12 subdivisions of Hatha Yoga, which are Mahamudra, Mahabandha, Mahaveda, Khechari Mudra, Jalandhara Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, Mula Bandha, the 3 bandhas. Dirgha Pranava Sandhana, we'll be coming to that. Siddhanta Shravana, which means to listen to the philosophies. I think Siddhanta here would refer to the yogic philosophies. Vajroli, Amaroli, and Sahajoli. So these are considered to be the 12 subdivisions of Hatha Yoga, which the Upanishad later explains. Each of these divisions would be dealt with by the Upanishad. Now we come to the 8 divisions of yoga. We saw that it's the Ashtanga Yoga. So out of the yamas, mitahara is considered to be the most important. The Upanishad again does not enumerate how many yamas are there. It does not say whether there are 5 yamas as we find in the Patanjali Sutras or 10 yamas as we find in the Hatha Pradipika. But I think we can infer that again when they say yamas, they refer to the list of 10. Because Mitahara is mentioned, which we do not find in the Patanjali Sutras. So Mitahara is considered to be the most important of the yamas. And out of niyamas, ahimsa is considered to be the most important. Out of that list of 10 niyamas, which we find in the Hatha Pradipika, ahimsa is considered to be the most important. Now, when it comes to asanas, the Upanishad says that there are innumerable asanas, out of which 80 are considered to be important. And out of these 80, again, 4 are considered to be the most important. And what are they? Siddhasana, Padmasana, Simhasana, and Bhadrasana. Again, the same list that we find in the Hatha Pradipika. This, again, these 4 main asanas we'll be finding repeated in multiple Yoga Upanishads. So it's an important concept to keep in mind. Now, the Upanishad also mentions about the different stages that the practice of yoga has to go through. It mentions that there are 4 stages. And what are they? First one is Arambha Avastha. Arambha, as we all know, means beginning. So it's the stage of beginning. It's the stage where we start the practice. Here, the sadhaka has to chant the Pranava mantra, which is the Dirgha Pranava Sandhana, which we found as one of the 12 steps of Hatha Yoga Sadhana. He has to chant the Pranava mantra to remove the obstacles and defects. So this is prescribed as a method of removing the obstacles, because when you're entering into the practice, you do not need anything to obstruct your progress, and you also do not, if some defect that you yourself have ends up limiting you or ends up holding you back, then that is also not desirable. So Dirgha Pranava Sandhana, the chanting of the Pranava mantra, is prescribed in the beginning stages, so that the obstacles which come from the external world and defects which we find in ourselves can be removed. The second stage is the Ghata Avastha, which is the stage where the sadhaka puts in effort to unite prana and apana, manas and buddhi, and the atman and paramatman. Which is, I think, basically what they mean by giving this the prana, apana, manas, buddhi, and atman, paramatman, is to say that to attain yoga. Yoga itself means union. So to attain union, the sadhaka has to put in effort. So the stage where he puts in effort is the stage which is the Gatha Avastha. So that proceeds after Arambha Avastha. When he starts doing the yogic practices, that is Gatha Avastha. The third one is the Parichaya Avastha, which means Parichaya means to aggregate something or accumulate something. So when the efforts of the sadhaka get accumulated, this is achieved again by constant practice, then the sadhaka is said to be in the state of Parichaya Avastha. And here the sadhaka moves closer to Samadhi. The fourth and the final stage of yoga is Nishpati Avastha, which is the stage of consummation where the sadhaka attains the goal of yoga, which is Samadhi. So these are the 4 stages of yoga: Arambha, Ghata, Parichaya, and Nishpati. This again we find in the Hatha Pradipika. There are a lot of similarities between the Hatha Pradipika and the Yoga-Tattva Upanishad. Now, the Upanishad mentions certain precautions that the yogic practitioner must keep in mind, and certain obstacles that he might face when it comes to yoga. What are they? The Upanishad mentions a list of obstacles which a yogi must carefully avoid, and they are: the first and foremost is alasyam, which is laziness. Could be mental laziness, could be physical laziness. Kathanam, which is boasting, blowing your own trumpet, being too proud of yourself. Dhurta Goshti, which is bad company, to mingle around people who are not the right people for you, people who do not motivate you in your practice, who are not conducive to your spiritual progress. Mantra Adi Sadhana means mantra here does not mean the mantra in the good context, not the good mantras. Mantras here, I think, refers to necromancy, which is black magic and sorcery. There are certain mantras which are used to communicate with the dead, perhaps black magic and all that stuff, which is not widely practiced. These esoteric secret practices, the Upanishad says those should not be followed. There are mantras, for example, for causing harm to others. There are things like that. So the Upanishad says that those things should not be resorted to. Dhatu Stri Laulyam. Dhatu here refers to alchemy, which is a practice by which any element can be converted into gold. But I think here dhatu here refers to dabbling with elements as such. There are certain powers that certain elements are said to possess, and a person who harnesses that power could achieve something, who could achieve certain siddhis, for example. The Upanishad says that that should not be done. That is not the right way of attaining siddhis. And Stri Laulyam is lust for women. Again, this is from a male context. I think what they mean is sexual continence is important. So from when we come to practitioners who are women, I think the corresponding obstacle would be being lust for men, for example. So these are the obstacles that the Upanishad sets forth. All these phenomena are said to be like a mirage and should be avoided by the sadhaka using his virtues and his wisdom. So this is how to overcome the obstacles. Now, diet and dinacharya. The food conducive to the yogi are cooked rice, wheat, and green gram. These are the three things that the Upanishad mentions and prescribes. Milk and ghee are recommended during the initial stages of the practice. The food that are prohibited for the yogi are as follows: salty, sour, spicy, pungent, and astringent food. Basically, anything that is not sweet. There are 6 rasas, right? And uh, any rasa which is not madhura is prohibited for the yogi. And mustard is prohibited. Bitter vegetables are prohibited, and asafoetida is prohibited. He should avoid proximity to fire, traveling, early morning baths, fasting, and sexual intercourse. Basically, anything which drains the body of physical vigor or mental vigor, spiritual vigor, anything which drains the body should be avoided, because he needs to save whatever energy he has so that he can channelize it into his yogic practice. That is the idea. So, this is about the diet and dinacharya. The primary symptoms of yoga siddhis. As the sadhaka engages in yogic practice, he will experience sweating during the initial stage, tremors during the intermediary stage, and hollowness of the body. Hollowness here signifying lightness. The body feels very light during, as he increases his practice, during the final stage, for example. As the yogi advances in his sadhana, he will experience his body levitating even when he is in Padmasana. We find a lot of caricatures about this idea where, you know, a person sits in meditation and just levitates into the air. So that is actually mentioned. The Upanishad says that as one advances in his practice, this feeling of levitation, where the body is so light, that would actually be experienced by the yogi. His sleep and quantity of excretions will reduce. Superhuman abilities such as the Bhuchara Siddhi, this is mentioned in the Upanishad, which is the ability to wander over the world. Bhu meaning earth, Chara means to wander. Siddhi, that would be attained, and the strength to conquer all creatures would be attained. The Upanishad says that as a person, one of the yoga siddhis is that he would become so strong that he would be able to kill a lion or a tiger with one blow of his hand. So that's the statement used in the Upanishad. So that kind of power would be attained by him. He will become extremely attractive and emit sweet body odor. These are the primary symptoms of the yoga siddhis. Now we come to pranayama. I'll be covering pranayama and pratyahara among the Ashtanga yoga. I will not be doing dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. The reason why I'm covering these two is because there are certain siddhis mentioned here also, and also because the duration of pranayama is, it's better to know them. You could expect questions on that. So pranayama is to be practiced as follows: inhale through ida, which is the left nostril, for 16 matras, perform kumbhaka, which is a retention, for 64 matras, and exhale through the pingala, which is the right nostril, for 32 matras in the ratio of 1:4:2. This is the most popularly followed ratio, though you would find different ratios in different texts. This is considered to be the standard ratio, 1:4:2. The yogi should practice up to 80 kumbhakas 4 times a day during the morning, midday, evening, and midnight. 3 months of this practice will lead to nadi shuddhi, which is the purification of the nadis, at which point the yogi will experience lightness, slimness of the body, luster, and increased digestive power. So these are again the symptoms of achieving nadi shuddhi, just purification of the nadis. Now, when we come to pratyahara, withdrawing the sense organs from their objects through the practice of kumbhaka is pratyahara. This is how the Upanishad defines pratyahara. By meditating on everything that is perceived to be the Atman, pratyahara is to be practiced. This will result in various siddhis. Again, siddhis are mentioned here, such as clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is the ability to predict what would happen in the future. Clairaudience is to be able to hear things which can't be heard by other people, which are inaudible to other normal humans. Teleportation is the ability to move from one place to another within matter of seconds. So that is teleportation, and etc. So such siddhis would be attained by a person who has mastered pratyahara. But the yogi should treat these siddhis as impediments to the attainment of the great siddhi, which is liberation. So, which is why in the yogic tradition, it is usually prescribed that whatever siddhis that a person attains during his practice, he should be very careful that he does not lose himself in them, that he does not become too attracted to them. So that, because when that happens, when he gets attracted to these siddhis that he achieves along the way, he loses focus of the ultimate goal that he is actually aspiring for. And the great siddhi is said to be liberation. So that is the idea again that is presented here. The Upanishad also contains details of dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. The idea of dharana presented in the Upanishad is very similar to the one which we found in Trishiki Brahmana Upanishad. And I'm not going to be explaining them in detail. I'm not going to be explaining that aspect at all. Again, it also explains the Mahamudra, Mahabandha, Mahaveda, Kechari, and all that, those things also in detail. However, I will not be covering them because only these have been mentioned in the UGC syllabus. I will be giving you a link where you can study the entire Upanishad. I'll be posting it in the comment section, so you can refer to it in case you wish to know more about this Upanishad. So with that, we come to a quick study of the Yoga-Tattva Upanishad. Thank you.